Hey guys, today I want to introduce you to the Bug. This is a 1970 Volkswagen Type 1, better known as a Bug or Beetle. Now this guy right here lived in Southern California its whole life and was recently relocated across the country to Washington, D.C. We're currently in Rock Creek Park on a beautiful spring day. But it has spent its entire life in a climate with very little precipitation and very little moisture in the air, which is kind of perfect for an older car. It's why it survived so well. But now that it's moved across country, it's going to have some work done. But I wanted to introduce you in as close to the form that I met this little guy as I could before any of the work gets done, with all the bumps and bruises still intact. So let's take a tour and get to know this little guy a bit better. This is Tinker, Tailor, Solder, Fry. We're going to start with this little Bug's very special engine. The first thing to know about the old Bug that makes it truly special is that unlike almost any other car on the road, this guy has an air-cooled engine. So what does that mean? Obviously, engines get hot and need to be cooled down, especially the oil. Most cars do this by running a liquid coolant around the engine, which then runs through a grid up in the grill in the front of the car called a radiator. And then cooling air is blown through the radiator to cool off the engine before it goes back into the engine to absorb more heat. VW drivers call these water-cooled engines. The air-cooled engine, like its name suggests, uses air to cool the engine and oil instead of a liquid coolant. The engine pumps the oil into a grid called the oil cooler and uses a fan to pump cooler outside air through the oil and through the engine itself. Air-cooled engines are common where a lot of air flows through the engine, so airplanes, motorcycles, and lawnmowers, but not a lot of cars are air-cooled. It's usually just more convenient to use a liquid to cool a car engine, plus air-cooled engines tend to be very loud. But a few car makers very much embraced the air-cooled engine. Famously, old Porsches used them a lot. The old VW, like this one, which were also designed by Ferdinand Porsche, and the old Chevy Corvair, which was named Corvair because it's air-cooled. What makes these cars easy to recognize is that the engine's usually in the back instead of the front, which means the car is pushed by the engine from the rear instead of pulled by the engine from the front. It really does change how the car drives, especially in snow. There's one more thing that makes this car unusual, and it's a little hard to see back here. The engine itself is made up of very few parts, and they're all relatively accessible. That means that as car engines go, it's pretty easy to do all of your own maintenance, and that applies to the entire car. As we look through the rest of the car, you'll see that this car comes apart very easily, and all the important parts that are usually hidden are easy to access and fix, which is why so many of these guys are still running 50 years later. Now we're going to switch from the back of the car to the front, and because there's no engine in the front and no storage in the back, Volkswagen gave us this little trunk space up front. It's not very big, but I can store a few groceries up here. But this front trunk space also gives us easy access to a bunch more of the car's working pieces so they can be fixed if something goes wrong. On the side here is the gas cap, so right here in the middle is the gas tank. Very easy to get to if it needs work, and about as far from the engine as possible in case of fire. But most important in the hood is this mountain of wires, sometimes called the spaghetti system. This is the brain of the car, and it's really unusually exposed for a car, so I can really get my hands dirty. The electricity for the car is produced by the alternator in the engine and stored in the battery, and then transported to a panel of 8 fuses right above the driver's knee. Then each of those 8 fuses is connected to one of these 8 metal tabs, and from there the wires distribute electricity throughout the car. I also have a color-coded map which corresponds to these color-coded wires, and from there I can tell whether each of these connects to a wiper motor or a headlight or a starter coil. Okay, that's enough electricity. Let's check out the interior. Because the wiring system is so exposed in the hood and the engine is so exposed from the trunk and from underneath the car, the interior is probably the part of the car with the fewest maintenance access points and is really just sort of a normal car. But not entirely. This is the dashboard, and there aren't a ton of features because, again, this car was designed to be simple and repairable. So you have a few buttons to turn on the lights and the wipers. There's a big hole where the stereo once was, and there will be a few more videos about that someday. And these knobs open and close air vents to allow fresh air to flow through the car. But if anything breaks behind the dashboard, it can be accessed through the hood, so there's no need to take the dashboard apart much further. The steering wheel, which also includes the horn, that's the silver part, has this insignia in the middle with a wolf on top of a factory. That tells you that this car was manufactured at the VW factory in Wolfsburg, Germany. VW Beetles were still being built that looked like this until 2003 in Brazil, so the insignia tells you where the car is from. Down here are the pedals, the clutch, the brake, and the gas. This is a manual transmission car, so there's a stick shift. And these little levers open heater vents that pull fresh air through a sealed pipe in the middle of the engine and into the car to warm it up in the winter. There is one big access point inside the car, which is very important. That's here in the back. If you recline the seats to get back here, and it is a little tight, but I've ridden back here, it isn't terrible. And of course there are ashtrays because it was the 70s. But if you pull up this bench seat, you find the battery for the car. And it isn't extremely convenient, but it is stored far away from the gasoline, which is smart, and also kept dry inside the car. There are a lot of jokes about being crammed in the back of a Volkswagen, and I get it. It is pretty tight back here, but it's not terrible. I'm sitting here in the back seat, and the leg space is a little tight, but it's not terrible. It's you can fit back here, and wouldn't want to be here all day, but it's workable. And last, just check out the interior. We think it was installed in the 80s sometime, but it's pretty awesome. It's a little sun-beaten from being in Southern California, but I really like it. It smells like you'd expect an old bug to smell, like hot vinyl and oil. So, thanks for coming along with me and getting to know the bug a little bit, and hopefully you can get to know us more in future videos.